And it wasn't just Wall Street that was drunk. Main Street was drunk. Everybody in the country was drunk on cheap money. That was the problem, because when you're drunk, you do things that you shouldn't. And then when you sober up and you realize your mistakes, I mean, the country started to sober up in 2008, but the government didn't want us to sober up. They're trying to get us drunk again, so we act stupid, because that's how they get reelected. They don't want to be the bearers of bad news, that we lived in a fantasy economy for the last decade, that we didn't really grow the economy. All those years the government was telling us that the GDP was growing. It wasn't really growing. All that was growing was the liabilities. We were just spending money, and every time we spent money, we pretended the economy was growing. But what really grows an economy is not spending money, it's savings. What you need to grow is productivity, is industrial output, it's capacity. We're not building new factories in this country, we're still shutting them down. So we need real economic growth, not more of this fantasy growth. And it is government. And what I have to do is go to Congress and remind them that it's capitalism that works. That's going to be our salvation, not government programs. You know, President Obama was talking about 5-year programs like he's in the Politburo of the old Soviet Union. Any other questions? Yeah.
As far as policies that you would like to see enacted, I mean, Clinton was held back by pay-as-you-go bill, which expired as soon as Bush got in. Would you see something or try and push something like that, or as far as like help getting businesses back on their feet and start getting, you know, people wanting to work?
Well,
would you put like tax incentives where we have to write it off over 10, 20 years for businesses? Immediately they could just write it all off that year, and that might give more incentive to build.
Sure. I mean, the main reason that most businesses are on their back is the government keeps kicking them down and won't let them get up. I mean, what we need to do is remove the impediments that the government places in the way of business. And one of the impediments, of course, is taxes. And I would love to lower taxes on businesses. And certainly, to the extent that a business makes a capital investment, why are we forcing them to amortize that over 10 or 20 years? Why can't they write off the cost of those improvements or those capital investments in the year in which the expenses incurred? Certainly, I would love to do that. But the only way we can really have tax cuts is if we have spending cuts. And we desperately need spending cuts. So you have a lot of Republicans that say, we're going to lower taxes. Well, what spending are they going to cut so that those lower taxes are possible? We're already spending, the federal government is spending $3.8 trillion, and they're only collecting $2.4 trillion in taxes. How can we cut taxes? We got to slash spending. Now, if we can spend, instead of spending $3.8 trillion, if we can just spend $2 trillion, then we can cut taxes by $400 billion. But until we cut the spending, it's just a lie to promise tax relief, because we can't do it. Because we have to pay for the government. And government, the cost of government is not what it collects in taxes, but what it spends. So what I want to do, and I don't want to just have this pay as you go, I want to slash spending right now. I want to take entire government departments and close them down so that they don't even exist anymore. I want to zero out their budgets. And then I want to take a lot of other programs and make deep, meaningful cuts, because we don't have the money. I mean, that's what anybody else do. And any family, right? If all of a sudden your income drops, you got to cut your spending. You can't just, keep spending. But the government has a printing press, so they think they can do it. But that way leads to disaster. If people think the financial crisis of 2008 was a disaster, wait till you see the currency crisis of 2011 or 2012. That is going to make what we just lived through look like, prosperity, look like the Roaring '20s. I mean, people were worried when they thought they were going to lose their money. Wait till you see how it feels when your money loses its value and you can't buy anything no matter how much you have. That's a much bigger disaster. And if we don't make these serious cuts now, that's what's going to happen.
Peter, I thought I kind of really understood the federal budget until this day. But my question is, if you slash the federal government and you close up all the doors to tons of programs, tons of agencies, because there's 2.15 billion people working in the federal government.
Yeah.
You throw this country into massive unemployment, and the 10% becomes nothing. You're going to go up to 40 to 50%. What do you do with those people who are out of work?
Remember, those people right now are not actually producing anything. They're not adding to the economy. They're taking out. They're living off the rest of us. So we can't just keep employing government workers.
No, I disagree with that.
No, but they're not. they only work because they take our tax dollars. They're not producing things. They're shuffling paper around. They're enforcing rules and regulations in many cases that are distorting the economy.
But what do you do with them?
Like, look at what that's going to happen is they're going to have to get productive employment. Now, what I want to do is by once you eliminate the burdens on small businesses, once you can cut all the regulation that makes it so hard for businesses to grow, once you can lower their taxes, then private businesses will be born to employ those people that used to work for the government. They didn't always work there.
First.
No.
You gotta have someplace for these people to go to.
They will, but you can't they can't go anywhere until you slash the federal spending. Remember, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have all these people working for government. They worked in the private sector. Remember all the factories that we used to have in Connecticut? Remember all the stuff we used to make here? Why don't we make anything anymore? Because people are working in government instead. The same thing in the state. More people in Connecticut work for the government than anywhere else, and that's why the state is a mess financially. Because we need
the state. I'm really not happy to hear that.
we need real productive employment. We don't need jobs just so people can have jobs. We need the productivity. We need the output. And unfortunately, you don't get that from government jobs. That makes us all less productive. Remember, in the old Soviet Union, everybody had a job. Nobody was unemployed, but they were all poor. None of the slaves were unemployed. They all had jobs. What good was it? Right? We don't just want to have jobs. And hopefully people are going to find out that we're going to have a lot of people with jobs, and they're not going to be able to buy anything with their paychecks.
That's one.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I think I can cut you off. This is really quick, and it's basically just to get more information about you as a candidate. You mentioned that a couple of times, actually stressed you really would like to have a revolution if elected in Washington, and to repeal the rules and regulations that have basically brought down the housing market imploding, the dot-com crisis, and the possible future currency crisis. Please name one rule or regulation that would seek to repeal why.
Well, there are a number of them. First of all, first of all, we can start with Fannie and Freddie. I don't think the federal government should have any role in the housing market whatsoever, so we should simply allow Fannie and Freddie to go bankrupt. Right now, the federal government is guaranteeing 96% of all the mortgages. The government should not be involved in mortgage finance. People should buy houses they can afford. They shouldn't be buying houses based on government subsidized loans. So the government needs to pull out of the housing market and repeal those regulations right now that are distorting the market. Do you think we would have housing prices at these levels if individuals had to pay for them with their own money? And there's a lot of things that we need to get the government out of that are distorting the market. One of the reasons that banks are taking so much risk is because the government guarantees all the bank accounts. I mean, how many people in this room have bank accounts? How many people have looked at the balance sheets of their banks to see how risky their loan portfolios are? Nobody cares. Nobody does any research. You just open up a bank account. You don't care what the bank does with your money because the government told you if the bank goes under, it's guaranteed. So nobody cares. You don't care, and the banks don't care. So everybody is taking reckless risk because the government has created a moral hazard. If the government didn't insure that bank account, then you wouldn't be so reckless of where you put your money. People would be concerned about what banks did with their money. Banks would compete for deposits based on who was the safest bank. No one does that. The government distorts the market with every regulation that they pass. I said in my industry, in the brokerage industry, I said I got 7 people working for me just complying with rules and regulations. I mean, none of them are making the brokerage industry better. Look at Bernie Madoff. I mean, look at all the rules and regulations that existed, yet Bernie Madoff stole $50 billion in the biggest Ponzi scheme ever, despite FINRA, despite the SEC. All this stuff is a waste. It creates a false sense of security. And what happens is these major industries captivate the regulators, and they use them to insulate themselves from competition. The big firms love the regulation because they can afford it. But small firms like mine and even smaller firms have a very hard time doing it. Many firms are going out of business because they can't afford the regulatory burden.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? I know it seems that it's in limbo. A lot of talk over the last few months has been national health care. Can you give me where you would stand on what was presented to our Congress and our Senate and changes that you would make?
Yeah, I mean, the healthcare crisis is probably one of the easiest problems to solve. It's a problem that was created by government, and now government is looking for a solution.